Okay, Kum Lana Black Gemara. Today's daf is daf Kuf Aleph. We'll begin from the Mishnah of Kuf Beis in the bottom. Hamoicher Zeisav Le'etzim. If somebody sells, he has olive trees, but they're in very poor quality, very poor condition, so he sells it basically as firewood. And even though you're not allowed to cut down fruit trees because of Baal Tashchis, but where the firewood is worth more than the fruits, then you're permitted. So he sold the olive trees for firewood. But he didn't immediately take it. The buyer didn't take it straight away. And some olives started to grow, poor quality olives. And if you go ahead and squeeze these olives, you'll be able to produce a little bit of oil, less than a revius per saw. We say that it's so insignificant, it belongs to the person who purchased these olive trees, not to the landowner, but to the person who purchased the olive trees. But also the revius lasa, if the quality of the grapes are a bit better, they were able to produce a revius of oil, then since it wasn't part of the deal, the person says, look, it's my olives that produced it, and I bought it. If it wouldn't be for my land, it would never have grown. So they have to divide it and share it equally, the olive oil. The next case is Shotaf Nar Zesav. There was a river overflowed and took with it, swept away some of these olive trees, and took also a lump of dirt with it as well, where the roots were sitting. The Nostam and placed them in a neighboring field. And then it sort of took root there, and it started to grow olives. This one says, my olive tree, and therefore any olives that grew on your property are mine. And it was my land that caused it to grow. You have to divide it. We're up to the Gemara of Kuf Amud Beis towards the bottom of the page. Okay, so he sold an olive tree for firewood. Hey, what are we talking about? If he sold the olive trees, Reuben had a farm and he sold the olive trees, and he says to Shimon, cut it down straight away and take it off my land. Then I feel the if he delayed taking it off the land, then anything that grew belongs to the owner of the land, not to the owner of the olives, because he was supposed to take it away straight away. And if he would have told him, on the other hand, I'm selling you these olive trees whenever you're ready, when it suits you, take them off my land, use them as firewood, then I'll feast Nami the Balzasis. So since he had a right to leave the trees growing, then any olives that grew there should belong to the owner of the olive trees, the purchaser. No, we're talking about here. We're talking about in the case the Amalei, he told him stomach. He didn't make up with him a time straight away or delay. He just said to him, I'm selling you these olive trees, without specifying any conditions. So pacha should be if the amount of oil that they're able to squeeze out was less than a revius, look up to inish. Nobody really cares about it. That belongs to the person of the purchaser. The revius, if there's a revius of oil per saw, then cup the inch. People are particular, and that's when the Mishnah kicks in and says he divided. We're on Kuf Aleph at the very top of the page. Rav Shimon Pazi says, when we calculate this revius of oil, that's after we deducted chutzmin all the expenses that are involved in actually, harvesting these olives and then squeezing them and so on. You take that off, and if you still have a net revius of olive oil left, then it belongs to the purchaser. Okay, so the Mishnah said, if a river comes and sweeps away a few olive trees together with their roots and together with the sand with the roots, and it lands in some other person's property, and it grows, and there's new olives growing, and there's an argument who actually owns these new olives are growing, so we say yachleku. Now it's important to say that it went together, the Gemara will say it went together with the lump of dirt, because otherwise anything that grows the first 3 years falls under the category of arla, which the first 3 years you can't have any benefits. So what are they arguing about? But if the entire tree with the roots and the soil around it, you replant it, then we don't start recalculating the arla. It's a continuation of its previous growth. So therefore, the Gemara says, Amarula, top line of Kuf Aleph, Ula says, Amar Shlakish, Leishanu el Shenekre Begushain. We're talking about that when the trees are swept away, they're swept away together with a lump of dirt. Now, interesting, the Gemara here. The owner of the land, if he would have had to plant his own olive trees, the first 3 years he would have no benefit from it. It's only after the 3 years. So here we have a whole argument. The persons who owned the olive trees, not the person who owned the land, the person who owned the olive trees will claim to the landowner, I don't care, okay, maybe we'll have to share in the future, but the first 3 years, if you would have planted yourself, you would have nothing. So I should keep an entire stock of olives and olive oil that is produced. That's his argument. And then we have to see, so what's the counter argument for the farmer? The Mishnah said, Yachleika, you divide it. What are we talking about here? When are we dividing it? Are we dividing it post the 3 years? Because the first 3 years, he couldn't have, even if we were to plant himself, nothing would happen. Or dividing the first 3 years, because post 3 years, he could have planted it himself, and after 3 years, it'd be 100% his. So now I'm allowing you to keep it on my land. Let's divide it. So here's the Gemara. Says the Gemara, we're talking about when you divide the olives on the crop only after the first 3 years. After the first 3 years, everything belongs to the owner of the olive trees. Why? Because he has a valid claim. Normally he says, if you would, if you would have planted it, within the first 3 years, tell me, would you have been able to eat from those olives? Of course not. So why should you get any share in my olives? So the Gemara asks, there's a counter argument. Why can't the farmer say to them, had I planted it, okay, you're right. I'll grant you that. The first 3 years I would have no benefit. But after those 3 years, will be 100% mine. 100% mine. So what am I benefiting if I have to wait 3 years and then I'm only getting 50% and you're taking up all this room on my farm? Why should I accept that? If you want me to allow you to have the olive trees, if I would have waited 3 years, I could have had a whole lot myself. You're telling me I should wait 3 years and I'll share with you 50-50 doesn't make sense. It only makes sense if I have a benefit now of 50-50. So therefore, I'm benefiting because if I would have planted it today, I wouldn't have any benefit for 3 years. So because I'm getting a benefit for these 3 years, 50-50, it makes sense that post the 3 years, we'll continue that arrangement of 50-50. Elakiel said Rabban Rish Lakish. Rabban came along to the name Rish Lakish. He modified it as follows. When do we say and when do we say you divide it equally only if it was uprooted together with its roots and the first 3 years? If we're talking about it's only the first 3 years that we divide equally. After 3 years, it belongs entirely to the owner of the land, because if he would have planted it and waited the 3 years, it would have been his anyway, 100%. So after 3 years, it's his. It's only the first 3 years that they divide. Normally, because he tells the owner of the olive trees, if I would have planted, I could have eaten a whole lot myself. Says the Gemara, but doesn't the owner of the olive trees have a counter argument? The Lamy, he says to him, look, you want to share with me 50-50 for the first 3 years, and afterwards you want to keep it 100%. What's in it for me? In fact, it's going all your way. Because if you would have planted it, the first 3 years, you would have no benefit from the land or from the olive trees because you couldn't use it. And now you have my trees, and you want to have half of it, and then afterwards you throw me away. So let me say to him, if you would have planted you wouldn't have eaten anything at all. But I'm going to be kind, and I'm going to allow you to eat 50% of my olives, which you wouldn't have been able to had you planted your own tree. So and now you want to you're eating half with me, so we should continue that way. What do you mean after 3 years it's 100% yours? Says the Gemara, in this case, the farmer, the owner of the land, says to him, I don't really benefit from the fact that your olive trees are here in the first 3 years. And therefore you want to say, because you're so kind to me, because I couldn't have done anything to the land, I couldn't have any benefit from the land for the first 3 years where the olive trees are growing, because I couldn't eat the olives. So therefore you think that I have no benefit, and therefore you're entitled to continue after the 3 years 50-50. My counter argument, says the owner of the land, is no. He says to him, I would have benefited if I would have planted my own olive trees. True, I couldn't eat it for 3 years, but I would have benefited because the trees are still just budding, they're fledgling trees. I would have benefited. I could have planted something right next to it, beetroots, other vegetables. I could have planted right next to it and grown. I could have made use of the land. And now, because your trees are there, I have no use of the land whatsoever. Therefore, I'm entitled to 50-50. But post 3 years, if I would have planted it, it would be 100% mine. Why should I share with you? So I'm going to keep your olives. Yeah, not to have a ketinit. He says, if I would have planted havakatin, the trees would have been very low trees because the first 3 years. I would have planted things. I would have planted things underneath those trees, silka, beetroots, yuroka, other vegetables, and therefore I would have benefited from the land during those 3 years anyway. So therefore, you have no sense of entitlement. We're going to share 50-50 because you took away my benefit of the land. We'll share 50-50. But after the 3 years, it's all mine. Tana, we learned Omar Halal. What happens if the guy says Zaysai ani noitel, to the owner of the olive tree says, after we're talking about after it took root. Before it took root, there's nothing to talk about. But after it took root, a few months later, the olive trees now took root in this land. Ain Shemle, the owner of the olive tree says, I want it back. I want to uproot them and bring them back, relocate them back on my farm. We don't listen to them. My time, why not? Omar Rabbi Yechon Mishum Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, I guess there's a couple of ways of learning it. One way is if you uproot the olive trees and now suddenly it would look barren and it's not nice. We want Eretz Yisrael to look as nice as possible. Or other Rishonim say, we're worried that the person who owned the land is not going to replant it. And we want to see olive tree, we want to see growth in Eretz Yisrael. So because of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Amar Rabbi said, going do. This is a perfect example that Tzricha Rabbi need a giant of a person like Rabbi Yechanan to come up with this reason. Because if not Rabbi Yechanan, I would have come up with another reason altogether, and that is simply your olive trees now took root in my land. The water swept it away, brought it here. It's been here for months. It sort of took root. If you're going to uproot it, you're going to ruin my land. That's why I could prevent you from taking it away. But Rabbi Yechanan comes along and says, no, it's because of Yishvat Yisrael. And what's the big deal? As Gemara will say later, there's a big difference in halacha. If it's because Yishuv Yisrael, this law is only limited to Israel. But if you learn because you're weakening my land, then this law applies in Chutz La'aretz, just like in Eretz Yisrael. So it's a big nafin halacha. And we need a great man like Rabbi Yechon to come up with this idea of Yishuv Yisrael. In fact, the Gemara now is going to bring another example where Rabbi Yechon has said something and Rabbi Yimah made a comment. Only a great man like Rabbi Yechon can say it. Now remember, Rabbi Yimah despised people from Babel. Rabbi Yechon was from Israel, so obviously he's saying it also because he wants to enhance the rabbis in Israel, so Israel say how great they are. Tanhasa we learned there. Rabbi Yehuda says, now there's a big argument. That's a quick introduction. There's a big argument we had in Kedushin, the second Perik, and other places. If a goy owns land in Israel, can he really own the land in Israel? Is it more like a long-term lease, or can he actually own it? And the difference is, what happens to the laws of Meiser and Truma? If the guy does not really own the land of Israel, he has a lease, he has a use, but he doesn't really own the land, then there's still an inherent chiyuv, intrinsic chiyuv of Truma and Meiser on the land. Ein kinyan lenochri, there's no kinyan to a guy to be mafkia, to remove the chiyuv of Truma and Meiser, which means that if I would have bought grains from a guy in Israel, I have to give Truma Meiser. That's one opinion. And the other opinion is yesh kinyan l'nachi, even though we shouldn't sell to a goy, but if we did, goyim own the land, whatever they own, and therefore there's no goyim have no mitzvah Truma Meiser, so there's no chiyuv of Truma Meiser. That's one thing. Another thing we have to know as introduction. There are three ways that a person comes into a land that's not theirs and works in that land. One way is called a schiris, seicher. One way is aris, which we learn all the time, and the other one is a chayker, which we had a few times in Gemara as well. Seich is basically I pay you money and I use the land for myself, the crop, whatever the harvest is, good or bad, it's all mine. An aris is a relationship where I'm a sharecropper. You own the land, and the arrangement is I'll do all the work and I get a share in the land, a half, a third, a quarter, whatever the share may be, whatever arrangement we have. And how do I pay you? With your crop, with the produce. And some years we have better yields, and some year we have worse yields. Whatever it is, whatever the case may be. But then we have a third kind, it's called a chayker. A chayker is where I make up with you, I'm going to give you, let's say, 1 ton of grains every year from your field. Now, some years the yield will be unbelievably and I'll profit. Some years the yield will be terrible, be a drought, and nothing will grow. I still have to pay you a fixed amount. So chayker is a fixed amount that you pay from the land. Aris is not a fixed amount; it's pro rata, and it's whatever the yield of that year is. And the seicher is you pay with money. So the Gemara, not we're bearing that in mind. Let's learn the Gemara, and the question will be: does an oris have the same laws as a chayker or not? So that house we learned. Rabbi Yehuda says the following. Rabbi Yehuda said the following thing, and the question is what Rabbi Yehuda meant. Hamekabels de avoisav min hanochi. You received the field of your elders from a guy, and the din is maser that you have to give. You have to give maser. You have to give Maisa.
What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean,
Makabel means I'm a sharecropper or a chayker, as we'll see. We're talking about a sharecropper. So the arrangement is 50-50. 50-50. Okay, so therefore I am going to give you 50% of the crop. So because you took it from a goy, right? And we believe that a goy does not have a share in Eretz Yisrael, which means that the entire crop you have to give Maisa from. You have to give Maisa from the entire crop. But if you're going to give the goy 50%, and I have a debt to the goy, we're understanding that the pshat like this: the sharecropper owns all the crop, and the arrangement is he has a debt of 50% to the owner. So he has a debt to the goy who's the owner of the land, and he's going to pay the owner because he's an oris with the yield or whatever, the grains, let's say, included in that 50% of grains that he's giving to the owner is the truma and meiser that you have to give, because a goy does not cancel the mitzvah of truma and meiser. So you're going to give the goy 50% of let's say whatever the crop is or the grains. Included in that 50% is meiser, it's tevel, is meiser and truma. So I am paying off my debt with a truma meiser. Therefore, the din is first you have to give meiser, give the 10% of truma, give all that. So you only have, and then you only have 88%, but you have to give 50% of the 100% to the guy, and you keep the rest. The nice and like you give.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just confused. Can you just explain again? It says
what are you confused about?
Because I don't know what we're talking about here. Makabel stay a voice of min hagoy. So what does that mean? There's a Jew who is the owner? Who's the sharecropper?
The guy is the owner.
The guy is the owner.
The guy is the owner.
So
and what do you call it? The guy is the owner. You're a sharecropper, 50-50, right? We view it as, right now we understand, we view it as that you actually worked on the crop, so 100% of the crop belongs to you, but you have an arrangement that you have to pay 50% of it to the guy, which means you have a debt of 50% of whatever the yield was. The problem is the goy does not cancel the chiv of truma meiser. So if you're going to give 50% of the grains to the goy, included in that 50% will be part of it is meiser that should have been given away and separated, and truma that should have been separated, and so on. So what do you do? And you're not allowed to pay off your debts with meiser, as we know.
So what does it mean? What does it mean? Stay a voice of? What does
tomorrow we'll talk about it in a minute.
Oh, okay.
So therefore, the yid has to give meiser first, pay off all the trumas, pay all the types that you have to pay, and then let's say there was 100 bushels of wheat, and after you give all trumas of meisers, you're in the 80s. You still have to give 50 bushels to the guy. You're going to lose out. You're going to now earn not 50 bushels. You're going to have a lot less because the meiser part of the guy you're taking off from your own. You follow? Okay, good. So that's what he seems to be saying. The Gemara is going to try to understand it. Savru, let's understand. Mais de'avoisa. First of all, what do you mean the field of his parents? It's referring to Eretz Yisrael. It's a generic term. Israel belongs to us, and therefore every yid in Eretz Yisrael, this is Sdei Avoisav. Every yid there is Sdei Avoisav. That's number one. Okay. And then continue. They belong to Abraham Yaakov. Kshavani holds ein kinyan lenochri be'eretz Yisrael, that a goy has no right of acquisition in Eretz Yisrael at all. Lahafkimi and meiser. Therefore, every single thing that a goy grows, if you buy from a goy, you have to give true meiser. Now, that's okay. And then we continue. Umekabel. And we believe also that an oris has the same status as a chayker. And others have the same stake as a chayke. A chayke, remember, is a fixed amount that you organize with the owner of the land. I'm going to do all the work, and I'm going to pay you an X amount of crop from the field every single year, whatever it is. Whether the field produces it, whether the field doesn't produce it, doesn't matter. So we thought that a sharecropper, halachically, is very similar to a chayke. And so they would say, ma chayke, bein of bein lo of it, boy yisuda. And just like a chayke, whether you had a yield, you didn't have a yield, you have to give meiser meitanle and give it to the guy. By a chayke, clearly, what's a chayke? A chayke is a debt. A chayke, if you have a fixed amount every single year, it's just not taking from the crop, because if there's no crop, I still have to pay him the same amount. So really, all it is a debt. It's like a rent. Every year I got to pay a debt. Only thing is I'm paying it from the field itself. So chayke, there's no question that because the chayke owns the crop itself, the chayke has to give the entire truma meiser for the entire crop. So we would have thought oris is the same thing. Af mekabel nami. So mekabel also. That mekabel and oris, even though that is dependent on the yield, it doesn't matter. It's as if he owns 100% of the yield, and he has a debt now 50% to give to the goy, to the owner. But he has to make sure it's minus the trumas and meiser, because a goy does not cancel the trumas and meisers. Ki poreya chayvasei the may meiser v'noisule. So he cannot pay the chayva with the money of meiser, and he gives it. Therefore, he has to deduct it all. That's what we thought. Okay, so what does that have to do with what we'll learn till now? We'll see in a minute. How can you tell me that's what Rabbi Yehuda is saying? That two things. First of all, that an oris, a sharecropper, is like a chayk, and second of all, that a goy has no kinyan, no acquisition at Yisrael, and everything that grows by a goy, yechayv and true ma'aseh. And that's a question. Time we learn. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Hamekabel stay avoisav." If somebody receives the field, this means literally his parents. Ben Meitzig, a goy came in, an oppressor. You remember we had this whole thing, Sikrukun, we had in Gittin, that a goy came and seized the property of this guy's father or his ancestors. Nochri, and so now he's working in that field. He's working in that field. Is massive. He has to give meiser, and the noiselay. He has to give first meiser, and then he pays it off to the goy. Yes. Now the question is, if the pshat is that a goy does not cancel the truma meiser, and therefore, if you work for a goy, you have to give him whatever his share is minus the meiser truma, then why are you talking about a case where it's a meitzik where the guy doesn't really own the land? Even if it was an ordinary guy who bought it from your parents and ancestors, or every guy, he bought land. You chayv and trumas and meisers. If you're a sharecropper, you got to take off the duct of trumas and meisers. It's clear from this Rabbi Yehuda that it's only by a meitzik that we say this, not by an ordinary guy. You know why? Because yesh kinyan lochi b'Yisrael have kibiyad meiser. A goy, if they own land at Yisrael, there's no longer a chiv of truma, and there's no longer a chiv of meiser, right? Well, and that's what we're relying today when you sell to a guy the land during a Shemitah year, because the guy have no chelik at Yisrael. Umekabel, they have no mitzvah, nothing else. Umekabel lav kechaykedam. And furthermore, somebody who is a sharecropper is not like a chayk, is not paying off debts. He's not paying off debts that you can argue that he's paying off with his meiser. In other words, even if you're going to argue that a goy does not own land in Yisrael, and there's a chiyuv of meiser on the land, it doesn't matter. A sharecropper, because we don't know exactly what Rabbi Yehuda holds. This is how Rashi learns. A sharecropper is not a chayk. A sharecropper has nothing to do with a chayk. A sharecropper is very different. It's not that the sharecropper owns 100% of the land and he has a debt to pay to the owner of the land. That's not how it works. We are partners. I only have 50% of the grains and you have 50%. So when you take your 50%, I'm not paying off my debts, it's yours. So why should I pay the meiser? I just pay the meiser on my 50% and not on yours. Clearly, Rabbi Yehuda says that. That's why Rabbi Yehuda comes along and says, but in an isolated case, if the person actually stole the land from your ancestors, there you have to give meiser on the entire contents. He's talking about literally your ancestors' land. And anyone else in that situation would not have to give meiser first before he gives the goy his share. You do. And it's only if you're a child or if it's in your family, this property that was stolen, and you work there, you're the only one who has to pay Maisa on the whole lot. We penalize you. Why? The idea de Chaviv, since you like this land, you have some kind of a connection to this land more than anywhere else. Tafi va'azul mikabel. You'll accept this law, even if we make you pay the Maisa on the whole lot. So you're actually losing out from your share. You'll do it because you love the land. It was in your ancestors, and you know the guy is a ganif, and you'll go. Anybody else, if you tell them that you have to pay, even though an ordinary sharecropper gets 50%, but you're going to lose because you're going to give Maisa on the other half for the guy, they just won't do the job. Says the Gemara, but why penalize? My time why penalize? What did he do wrong? His father's land was stolen by a guy, and he works in that land, and you penalizing him. Rabbi Yochanan said, in order to be bara in his hand. What does that mean? Rashi says it comes from the word clarity. In other words, we want, if we're going to tell this child or this son or daughter, they have certain feelings, they have certain connections to this land. If we are going, and that's why they're working there, and if we are going to charge him extra money, it's going to bother him so much that is going to force him to raise enough money to buy the land back from the guy. We want to give an incentive to this person to buy the land back from the guy. Who feels more for this land than anybody else other than the son? And the way to do it is, we know that he wants to work there. Charge him more, so he is eventually going to raise enough money to buy the land, and so on and so forth. That's how Rashi learns. Abena Hanano learns that the reason why we're charging only the son and nobody else is because Bura Biyoda, anybody else won't work and the land will lie fallow and nothing is going to happen. So therefore, we want that the son to pay a little bit extra to buy the land so the land does not stay Bura, does not stay fallow. Anyway, the point of all of this is that this come up with this idea over here that the descendant gets penalized, so that force him to buy the land back. Only a great man like Rabba can say it. Again, it's like Yishuv Etzes. Itma we learned. Okay, we digress. Back to our Gemara. Somebody goes in the field of his friend. You walk into somebody's property. He has a field, and the field can be used for wheat and other things, and you decide to plant trees there. Rav says, Shamin Loi, Rav says, we assess the value of this tree that you placed there, but the person who did without permission, he gets the lesser of the two amounts, because you have the profit, the improvement, and you have the expense. Whichever is the lesser amount, that's what he gets paid. And Shmuel says, we assess, we don't look at the lesser amount. What would a person pay to hire someone to plant these trees? That's what you pay. I'm going to couple of there's no argument between the two. Depends what the owner of this field wanted to do with this field. If it's in a region where most people plant trees in the field, then he pays like Shmuel whatever the going rate is, even though you didn't hire him, he didn't ask permission. But if it's in a region that it's a wheat belt, and people don't plant trees there, then you pay him the lesser amount. So there's no argument. Then you pay whatever the going rate is. I feel that normally you don't plant trees. Says Rav. This was the Rav, in fact, Shmuel as well. They didn't clarify their own. But we can tell from the following story. Now, who was the Rav? A guy came to Rav. Amalei said, Zil Shem. The guy came to Rav and said, go ahead. Hey, he said, this guy came and planted trees in my property. So Rav said, fine, go assess the value of the tree and pay him. We're not your payment. I don't want the trees in the first place. I want to grow wheat. So don't worry about it. Go ahead and assess the other time. So clearly from here we see that if it's not a region where you plant trees, then you still have to pay him, but the lesser amount, profit or expense. He said to him, but the story continues. He said to Rab, why should I pay anything? I don't want any trees there. I want to get rid of it. L'soif said, okay. L'soif at the end, Chazi saw the Godra, he saw that this person who came to Din Torah later went and he put a fence around the trees to make sure that they're preserved, they grow well, they come onto them, and he was watching them. They're not too long. Amalei said, Goli said, so Rav called him back. He said, Goli said, you just demonstrated that you actually approve of those trees. Now pay the full price. Whatever in fact, not only the full price. If the improvement is better, pay him the improvement. So we see from the story, Rab holds if it's a place you don't plant trees, you give the lesser amount. And you see what Shmuel said, but a place you do plant trees, you got to pay the full amount.
He didn't answer Robert didn't answer the question. If the
What's
guy
question?
the guy said, I don't want the trees. If he hadn't put the fence in, he really didn't want the trees, what would the answer have been?
You take it out, get rid of it. You can't. Someone can't force to put trees on your property.
Right. So he doesn't have to pay him anything.
Yeah, but that's not what happened in the story. In the story, he went ahead and he saw that afterwards. He went and put a fence around it. In other words, he saw from his actions that he was happy to have the trees. Yeah. Sorry, back to about it. We learned. If I go into your house, it was all ruined. I built there, I rebuilt the house without permission. And a while later, he came back and said, "You know what? I want my trees back. I want my wood back. I want my stones back." And he built without permission. This stranger. And yeah, he can take it back. Once you built it, it's there. He has to pay you for it, but you can't take it back. And the same question is regarding the trees. If the guy says, I want my trees back, we just said that the farmer could tell them take it back. What happens if the farmer says, I'm happy with the trees, leave it there, and the person who planted the tree says, I want it back? Same machlekes. That's not according to some. Mesa has a question. The Bag says, Beishamai says Shem. Beishamai says he can take the stones back, and Beisil says ain't Shem in life. Beisil says too bad, you got to leave it there. Leave it. Nachman no Beishamai. Nachman says you can take it back. Holds like Beishamai. When it answers who don't like Haitan, he learned like the following Bryce. It's time we learned Shem in loy David Hashem Elazar. Listen, he goes Hashem Elazar. Rav Shimon Gamul says, no, according to Shimon Elazar, there's no argument between Beit Shammai and Basil. You allow you if he wants his trees, he wants his wood back, or he wants his stones back, he can take them back. Shimon says, Beit Shammai says, Shemim listen, and Basil says, ain't Shemim. Says one of my happy look. Bottom line, can he take it back or not? I'm gonna Yaakov depends. Yaakov says it depends. Bid bias. Let's say in the case of a house that he goes in and he takes it back. Shema, listen. The sudden Shema, if he goes in the house and he says, I want it back, you listen to him. Because it doesn't ruin anything. He wants the stones back, take it back. But the sudden, if let's say he went into the field and planted trees there, and he said, I want my trees back, ain't Shema like. So here the Gemara says, you don't listen to him. Why not? Beside my time, here we have the argument. Either because Yishuvay Tisro and that we want it to look populated, and if you take it away, it looks barren. Or others say Mishum Choshed the Ara. Others say because you're weakening the land by pulling the roots out, because it took away a lot of the nutrients. Now the land is weaker, you can't plant anything there for a while. My benai, the difference in two opinions is if it's Yishuvay Tisro, then Chutz La'aretz he can take back the trees. But if it's because of weakening the land, then even Chutz La'aretz you cannot take it back. Mishnah. So here the Gemara concludes that the guy wants it back, he cannot take it back. Mishnah. Hamaske buys a chaveda. If somebody rents out a house to his friend, be meisak shamim. Right now we think it means for the winter. I cannot ask you to leave min hachag v'ad Pesach from Sukkot through Pesach because that's winter. And in winter houses are high demand and there's a shortage and they're scarce, so you can't in any way evict a tenant during the winter. But if somebody rents your house for the summer, this is how we understand the Mishnah right now, is shloishim yom, that all it is 30 days, and then you can evict him. Because stam renting is 30 days, you can evict him because in the summer there are plenty of houses available. But in the large cities, we're not talking about regional areas now, but in a large cities where basically people are gravitating to, and there's a shortage of houses. Even back then there was a shortage of houses. Is echad yemei the echad yemei shamim shneim asa chodesh 12 months. 12 months you have to let them stay there because his houses are scarce, and you mean to have time to look for other houses. What about a store? You're leasing a store. Whether it's an ordinary city, whether it's a large city, store, you always have to give 12 months. You have to give 12 months. And the reason, Rashi is a very interesting reason. The reason is everyone works on credit, and they don't know where to give the money back, but they know the store. They go back to the store and they pay, eventually when it's due, month, 2 months, 3 months. But if you evict him, move out, no one will know where to go to pay back their debts. So you can't do that. If you give him, if we have 12 months, and he knows the last few months he won't give credit, or he knows how to make sure that he gets paid, all debts get paid off. When it comes to a baker, a nachtoim, v'shatzaboyim, and dyers, shalosh shanim, you got to let them remain there 3 years. And the way Rashi learns, which is hard to understand, that it seems that bakers gave very long-term credit. So it seems up to 3 years. Other Rishonim find that hard to understand. Who gives credit up to 3 years? But anyway, that's what Rashi says. Says the Gemara. Let's understand. Why is it that if I say for the winter means entire winter? When a person rents in the winter, generally mean the whole winter. Could be said winter. If I said I'm going to rent you for the summer period, if I said to you I'm renting it for the summer, it means the summer. Why when I say for the summer it means 30 days, and when I say for the winter it means from Sukkot till Pesach? What's the difference? The Gemara says, Ella b'meisak shamim. The pshat is when it comes to we're talking about I stam went over rented. We didn't specify a time. I didn't say for winter. I didn't say for summer. I said I want to rent your place. So we say as follows: if generally schiras is 30 days, so in the summer it's 30 days. So that's a general rent of 30 days, and after 30 days, they can find another place they want to move. But in the rain, but in the winter, if I didn't specify a time, I just said, I want to rent your place, then you have to allow them to remain there the entire winter because they're not going to find another place. How can you send them out in the streets? They're not going to find another place to live. So even though we didn't specify more than just I'm renting a place, and stam renting is 30 days, in this case here, we say that that's it, it goes on. So the mother and that's a question. Now, what it goes between Sukkot and Pesach? It says in the Sefer, Bekrochim in a large city, whether summer, winter, 12 months. Now, it sounds like that it's 12 months, and if the 12 months end, let's say, in middle of Kislev, which is right in the middle of the winter, too bad, he has to leave. But you just said that in the middle of the winter, nobody can find other places. You can't let anybody go. How are you going to stamp shots? Let's say the time comes up during winter, you evict him. Why? You can't find houses to replace it. So what's pshat in the Mishnah? Omar Aviru said, what the pshat in the Mishnah is? We're not talking about evicting people and so on. We're talking about how much notice do you have to give. When we say 30 days or 12 months, we're talking about how much notice do you have to give. So if somebody rents a house, and the big machlekes are shown how to pshat. According to Rashi, even if we gave a specific time, and if it ended in the middle of the winter, I cannot evict you at all, unless I gave you notice during the summer, and you had 30 days in the summer. I gave you notice during the winter. I'm gonna evict you. I want you to know. We gave you 12 months. It ends in Cheshvan. You're gonna have to leave, but you need to notify them 30 days before the summer ends, so that they have time to find new dwellings. Others Rishonim argue, they say clearly not. They say that if you specified a date, I don't care, winter, summer, if you told them you have 9 months or whatever it is, and it ends at a certain day, they have to leave regardless it's winter or summer. But Rashi clearly says otherwise. To notify, this is how we learn it. If you rent somebody a place, you cannot evict them from Chag until Pesach. Unless you gave him 30 days notice. I know we actually learned that in the Brisa. When you say 30 days, there's a 12 months. Talking about notice. Just like there's an onus is on the landlord to give notice. The Seicher also has to give notice. Can't leave in the middle of the winter because where's he going to find people? If you would give me 30 days notice, have a tirachna, I would have bothered myself. I would find somebody. If you want to leave and you give me notice, you have to continue paying rent. You have to continue paying rent. and we said in a large city, you have to give 12 months notice before you want to leave, because in a large city, it's hard to find places and so on. So Amar says, when we say 30 days notice, that if you have to give 30 days notice, and if one of those 30 days is into winter season, then it doesn't work. But on shleishim yom only you need 30 days. This is what he meant to say. Not one day. You give 30 days notice, but if you give it, let's say, Tez Zayin El, so the 30th day is Tez Zayin Tishrei, it's too late. You're already one day in the winter. And you cannot evict them between Sukkot and Pesach. If you want to increase the rent, you're allowed to increase the rent. You're allowed to increase the rent. Okay, I have to leave you in the entire winter, but I'm not mechuyev to leave you. As the Gemara says right now, I'm not mechuyev to. I want to increase my rent. Says Nachman says a very interesting expression he uses. He says here, "Hi linkete bekufse." You're hanging on to something which is hanging on a person, on his male member. And you're telling him you better leave your shirt behind. No, but you tell by you raising the rent is tantamount to evicting them. If they can't afford to pay the increase, what are they going to do? They have to leave. So what's going on here? Like we're talking about the yakaboti. We're talking about that everybody else's rents went up, and therefore you have a right. So even though you're in the middle of a lease here, you have a right to increase. Now, there's a big machlekes Rashayin what I just said. According to some Rishonim, is only talking about this kind of a case over here, where even though the lease ended, but because it's the middle of the winter, I have to let them stay, so I have a right to increase the rent. What about if the lease is in the middle of the lease? The lease is not over yet. We made a 12-month lease, and month number 9, everybody else's rent went up. Do I have the right to raise the rent as well? And here we have a big machlekes. Is the Gemara referring to that kind of a case as well, that you can increase the rent in the middle of a lease? Well, that you cannot do, because once we agreed, we agreed. Okay, Gemara continues. Pshita, that's no question. Nafale Besa. Let's say the house collapsed. The landlord's rented out a house and the house collapsed. The landlord's own house collapsed. He has nowhere to live. The only house that he has to live is the other house, his investment property. So he goes over to the tenant and says, sorry, I know we're in the middle of a lease, but sorry, I need to take over the house. I have to have somewhere to live. So Pshita, there's no question. Nafale Besa, the landlord's house collapsed. He can tell the tenant, you don't want me to evict you in the street, but I'm not living in the street either. You're no better than me. Why should I live in the street? It's my house. So he can ask him to leave. Yeah. However, the big machlekes are shaynim. Rashi learns only the lease expired. According to Rashi, if the lease did not expire, even though it's a landlord's house, he has nowhere else to live, too bad. Other Rishonim learn, even if the lease did not expire, you have a right to go over. In fact, Tesis on the next page says so clearly that even the lease did not expire, in the middle of my house collapsed, I can say to the tenant, you have to leave. What about Zovne? The landlord sold the house, the property, somebody else, or he died and he inherited, bequeathed to somebody. You're not going to give somebody give. And then the new buyer, the new owner comes in and says, sorry, I want to move in, leave. Malay, so then the tenant has a right to say, you have no more rights than the original owner. The original owner has to give me 12 months in the city notice or 30 days here. You have to do the same thing. What about if the landlord made a wedding for his son and he needs a house for his son to live? Chazinan, we see. If there was plenty of ample time to give 30 days notice or 12 months in the city, then he should have given notice. If he didn't, then too bad to the landlord. He cannot evict the tenant. He has to follow the processes. But let's say they made an urgent wedding and they did. And there's no time to tell anybody. He can tell him, my son is no different than me, and you're no better than us, and we can ask you to leave, vacate the home so that we can move in. Now, the Gemara tells you a fascinating story. Ahugabra, there was a person. The Zovan Arba de Chamra. There was this person that he bought a whole amount of barrels of wine and a ship full of wine. And he the problem was he didn't have a warehouse, he had nowhere to place these barrels. There's this woman there, and he went over to her, he said, do you have a warehouse somewhere where I can store these barrels? She said to him, no. But he knew that she did have, but she wasn't interested in renting it out. What did he do? She was a lonely woman, a spinster. So he went over to her and he said, you know what? You're such a lovely woman. Let's get married. Ozal Kitcha. She was so delighted that somebody wanted to marry her, and she accepted. Then Then she said, "Oh, now you're my husband. Bring all your barrels and put in the warehouse." Then he went home. As soon as he had found a place for his barrels, he divorced her. He never intended to marry in the first place. The whole thing was deception. Shadallah, and he said to her, "What did she do? Her wrath was boundless." Azla she went. Agrosh kuloi, she went and hired these workers, these movers. Mineu Bay, and she paid them from the barrels of wine. Afikte, they got them to take all the barrels of wine out of the warehouse, but put them out in the street. And then the guy came running to take her to the Taita. What right do you have to take my barrels of wine out of the street? Kasher also, the way he behaved, that's what you should do to him as well. His reward is on his head. In other words, he behaved in the most, cynical way, and therefore she had every right to do what she did. So, you don't have to say if let's say it's a warehouse that she never rents out, and therefore, of course, she had a right to take it outside. Even if she normally rents it out. So the guy says, "Look, if you normally rent it out, at least you should have asked me to pay rent. I would have paid rent." She has a right to say, you can't force me to rent the property to you. I'm happy to rent to anyone else in the entire world. To rent it. But you never. The domit a lie. You appear to me. You appear to me like this lion ready to ambush. You're a mean-spirited person, and you're conniving. And I don't have any dealings with you. She has every right to say that. Okay. The reason is because they are a Kefa Meruba could have a lot of debts. Some of the trying to say the pshat here is not like Rashi that they have debts outstanding for 3 years. What kind of business is that if you have debts outstanding for 3 years? Others I learned the pshat is to relocate takes a very long time. For whatever reason, the machinery and the tools and everything else takes a very long time, and to reestablish themselves. So therefore, they need 3 years. Next Mishnah. If somebody rents, what are the duties, what are the obligations of a landlord? If somebody rents out a house for the landlord, what are his responsibilities? Anything which requires a craftsman, anything which requires a specialist, then the landlord has to pay for it. Bedelis, a door, benager, the bolts, bemanel, a lock, anything which is, you need a tradesman. But something that you don't need a tradesman, then the tenant has to fix up the small things that he can do himself. The tenant has to fix it up. Hazevel shabalabayis. The fertilizer belongs to the Bal Habas, fertilizer from the animals. The ainless seicher, and the seicher has no share in it. What exactly we're talking about? Whose fertilizer? Whose animals was it? The Gemara will discuss it. The only thing that belongs to the tenant is things which are the residue of the ovens and the stove. Tell me, learn. If somebody rents out a house as friend, the Bryce adds a few more things. Dauses, doors. Like to open up, you need doors. Windows. You need windows. In order to hold up the ceiling. If it says, well, wormy and falling apart. That's how Rashi learns. The Rambam learns and others learn that, let's say the house is dark, I need windows to be able to see. Now this is a big machlekes, because when you rented the house, you knew the house was dark. You saw there were no windows there. What right do you have to come after you became a tenant? Hey, I can't live it, it's too dark. And Rashi Taka holds you can't, and other Hashem hold you can't, because the right and others you can, because you knew what you were getting into. But the Rambam says that no, just because I went in, it's not a tacit agreement at all, because a house without sunlight is not a house. And therefore, even if we didn't make it up, since I rented, by definition, a house needs sunlight, the landlord has those essentials. Even though I knew that the essentials were missing, the landlord has responsibility to fix them up. Okay, tikra to lean on the beam. He has to fix up to support the beams. The seicher, what does the tenant do? The ladder, around the roof, he has to make the fence. The tenant does it because the roof is not really used that often, and therefore, because it's not used that often, it's not the landlord's responsibility. Again, to make the drains, the water drain, the pipes, and to cover the roof that it shouldn't rain inside. Interesting. You would have thought that the roof, make sure it doesn't rain inside, it's the landlord's responsibility. It says, it's a tenant's. I guess because you could do it yourself. Boyim and name Rav Sheish is mezuzah on me. Who has to pay for the mezuzahs on the doors? The landlord or the tenant? We said that mezuzah is a chayv of the living. Big machlek is a shaynim here, Yuma Menachas, and that is and Shabbos, and that is as follows. According to some Rishonim, in order to be chayiv mahatayr mezuzah, you need two things. Number one is you have to own the place, and number two is you have to live in the place. So if I own a house and I don't live there, mahatayr, I'm not chayiv in mezuzah. If I'm a tenant, I live there, but I don't know the house, I'm only chayiv in mezuzah midrabanan. And that is why a tenant doesn't have to put a mezuzah until 30 days later. If you own the house, you got to put it on straight away. Other Rishonim know that if you own the house, even if you're not there, you still have a chiyuv of a mezuzah. By a tenant, there's a machlekes there as well. If a tenant is chayiv ma'atayla midrabanan, and we have an extraordinary Rabbi Kiva Eger. Rabbi Kiva Eger writes in his Chuvas, I think in Chuvah 9. He writes in his Chuvas, since the halach is that if you have to live there to ma'atayla, if you own a house, if you don't live there, you're not chayiv. So he comes on the following. It's an amazing halacha. If you ever go on a trip and you leave your house, the owner of the house, the parents who own the house, leave the house, doesn't matter if the children are still there. He said if you go for a minimum of a couple of days, he doesn't define a couple of days, let's say 2-3 days. If you go abroad, away, on a holiday, you come back, you must take your mezuzahs off and put them back on again. Why is that? Because you're not chayiv mahatayra unless you own the house and you live there. Or if you're a tenant, unless you live there midrabanan. When you leave the house, there's no chiv of mezuzah anymore. When you come back a few days later, you have a new chiv of mezuzah. And we're going to learn in Menachos that you're not chayiv, that ta'aseh v'lo mina asu. You can't just walk in and the mezuzah automatically becomes a mitzvah. You have to put the mezuzah on and bang it on properly to be a mitzvah. So he passes Allah l'maisa that every time you leave your house, you have to take the mezuzah off. And one of his proofs are that David HaMelech was in the bathhouse and he was very upset because he couldn't think of any mitzvahs. He wasn't wearing tefillin, he wasn't wearing tzitzis, but then he remembered his bris milah. So Kiva Eger asked, what do you mean? But he has a mezuzah. He has a mezuzah at home. So he's always doing a mitzvah. So he says, from here we see that if you're not home, you're not doing the mitzvah mezuzah. Mezuzah is only while you're there, because mezuzah is there to protect. You only protect when the people there. If there are no people there, there's nothing to protect. Interesting idea. Okay, let's continue. Says the Gemara, okay, so mezuzah chayv v'sadari. So the chayda, of course, it's the tenant, the one who lives there. Says the Gemara, ela makom mezuzah mi. The question is, you have to have. They used to, dig a hole in the doorpost and put the mezuzah in there. So the chayda mezuzah is the doorpost actually called mezuzahs, and especially if it's stone, you have to grind it. It's a big job. Who has to do that? We learned if there's anything which you don't need a tradesman, the tenant has to do it. Why not? Because it's possible. The goofs of the kanya, he can hang it. He can hang it. Who said that you have to? Who said you have to? If it's a stone, who said you have to dig a hole in the stone? Hang it and trace it as, and you then attach it, nail it on onto the wall. So you don't have to build anything. Taisa brings a proof from here. The big machlek is Rashi and Taisa how the mezuzah should be. In fact, the big machlek Rashi and Taisa Menachos. How should a sefer Torah in the Aron be? Should it be horizontal or vertical? And Rashi holds that a mezuzah should be vertical. Taisa holds the mezuzah should be horizontal. And they bring a proof from here that it's vertical because it's hanging. It's hanging from the top. So obviously it's vertical, not horizontal. And that's why we have a mezuzah on a slope to satisfy both opinions, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. Okay, we'll pause here for a minute.